When you're raising sheep, food is a very important consideration because to raise sheep successfully, you've got to have something for them to eat. So today, since we're in the midst of putting some more hay in the hayloft, we figured what better time to talk a little bit about what we feed our sheep and why we feed second cut hay. So over the years of raising sheep, and before that raising goats, we've fed a lot of different feeds, from various grains, beet pulps to kind of help bulk things out, first cut hay, we've even fed wrapped hay. And at the end of the day, what works the best for us where we live is second cut hay. A huge reason for that, as you can see these sheep that are around me eating the bale I'm sitting on, it's very palatable to them. They really, really like it. And to go into a little bit more depth on what second cut hay is, essentially it's hay that has been taken from a hayfield that's been cut a second time. So they've already taken a first cut off, and the first cut tends to be a little woodier because a lot of the times the plants have gone really fast, and I'm making generalizations here, but they've gone really fast to trying to produce seed because that's what the plants want to do. When you cut them, you set them back, and the second growth or vegetative growth you get tends to be a little softer and a little nicer, and it tends to have a little bit more nutrition in it that the animals really like, the sheep in particular. So we feed that because A, it's a little more nutritious, and B, they waste a lot less. For anybody who's just kind of seeing this for the first time, we live in Ontario, which is in Canada, and essentially we have about 6 months of the year that even though the sheep can still be outside, there's very little usable food in the pastures. And that creates a little bit of a dilemma because essentially for 6 months of the year, we have to feed them. And what we choose to feed them is hay. I think this is a good time too to say that our sheep raising endeavor is not really to be commercial. We don't sell very much. I mean, we do sell the odd breeding animal and maybe a little bit of meat, but the main purpose is to feed us and our family. So we keep a very small flock. Really, it's no bigger than 20 to maybe maximum 30 sheep at any given time, and that's including all the lambs you have for the year. Sheep are interesting too because they kind of the yearly cycle's a bit different. You end up obviously in the early part of the year, like we are right now, you're kind of at your lowest numbers before lambs are born. Once lambs are born, you have a lot of sheep, but the nice part of that is it tends to coincide very well with the 6 months of the year when the sheep can be out on pasture. And when they can be out on pasture, that definitely reduces the amount you need to feed them. But once we get to about, I'm going to say October, maybe even November now, the pasture just stops growing. And once it stops growing, there's nothing for them to eat. And that's when we have to start feeding the second cut hay. So of course, there's lots of different ways to purchase hay or get hay. And the way that we prefer to get it is in these small square bales because, as you can see, they're a lot more easy for us to manage with just the two of us doing this here. So even though we have 38 acres here, we don't actually produce our own hay. Part of that is because we don't have enough space back there that's, I'm going to say it, manicured enough to be able to produce hay. A lot of our pasture is fairly scrubby. We're working on that, but it takes time unless you're willing to come in with some bigger machinery and do it quick. But the other reason is we don't own the machinery to do it. And going back to the fact that we're doing this for ourselves, we're not doing this as a business, really doesn't make a lot of sense financially for us to invest in that equipment because we'd be investing a lot in that equipment to be able to do it ourselves. So we purchase hay, and we've actually just come back from getting a load of hay. Now, of course, you have to think ahead with hay because this is not the time of year that hay is harvested. This is not the time of year that hay is cut. Hay is cut in the summer and has to be stored for the winter. So we have already stored quite a bit of hay in the loft of our barn, but unfortunately our barn doesn't hold enough hay to see us through with that roughly 20 to 30 sheep for the whole winter. We can get about 420, give or take, because the bales are sometimes a little different size, up in the loft. And we have to replenish that a couple of. The nice part is for us, because this is very local, and I think that's a huge plus to this. We don't produce it ourselves, so we're relying on outside inputs, but we're relying on outside inputs that are locally available and locally produced. And that is, I think, awesome, because that means we're not buying grains that are imported from another part of the country. This is literally grown within 20 minutes of us. We have a smaller trailer. It's allowed us to downsize from having a bigger truck to a smaller vehicle that of course can still pull some weight, but not as much weight as the truck could. I mean, that's an economic consideration right there, because to purchase a new truck or even to purchase a used truck right now is just not in the financial cards. So being able to take smaller loads like this, we can get about 45 bales, little square bales on this at a time, really takes some of the edge off. And it also means that in a given day, because we've always got other stuff going on, I think the most we've ever done is 3 of these loads in a day. Typically we do 1, occasionally we do 2. That means that in a given day, we're not completely killing ourselves to get this all stored, which is also really nice because it spreads that workload out over a longer period of time. In addition to the trailer, we do need a little bit of equipment to be able to do this. And one of the pieces of equipment we have is this small hay elevator. This is a really simple piece of equipment. We were able to buy it used, which was awesome. I think it was about $450, which we actually got it for a pretty good price. And it just runs off of a little electric motor. Now, we leave it up here now that we only have smaller animals because it's really not an obstacle, and it makes it super easy. We can go and get one of those loads of hay, bring it home, and in a very quick period of time, plug it in, run it, and have it up in the loft, which makes things a lot easier on us. So as I said earlier in the video, we used to feed other things such as beet pulp and various grains and that sort of thing. And while we do feed occasionally a little bit of sprouted oats, more of just to get them to do what we want sometimes, by going with the second cut hay, we've completely eliminated all the other feeds, and the sheep seem a lot healthier for it. So this is where I think it's really in essence part of that community building, because like I said, the hay is coming from less than 20 minutes from us. We're very fortunate because the people who are producing the hay have a much bigger farm than we do, have the equipment to do it, but they also have facilities to be able to store some of it, and they're willing to do that for us, which, because we're not doing this as a business, that it just takes the edge off and allows all of this to be much more pleasant, enjoyable, and not feel quite so much like the drudgery of having to get it all done in a very short period of time while still doing everything else. Wow, they're slow today. And of course, the ponies also get some of this second cut hay, although we do also feed them a little bit of first cut, but that's a whole nother discussion we're not going into today. So basically that's sort of our routine. We really like feeding the second cut hay, and while a lot of the times you will read or hear that goats and sheep can eat basically lesser quality hay, it's not entirely true. A lot of that is based on the fact that, unlike cattle or horses, goats in particular, but also many sheep, are a bit more browsers, and they will eat a wider range of things such as weeds that the other animals don't eat. And so that's where the reputation comes from, but the reality of it is they still do far better on this good quality second cut hay.